Hey, so we are now live. This is going to be a fun little character stream. Not going to be too serious, just going to be me doodling around and having fun with a character. You guys can, of course, ask all sorts of questions throughout as well. And yeah, I think this is going to be a fun one. Just giving people some time just to join. Just posted this on social media, so hopefully this is going to be a nice one. What I'm doing today, exactly, don't really know. This is going to be a bit of an exploration as well. So I have a few different pieces of reference here that I've just collected from Pinterest real quick. So don't really know where we are taking this guy. Probably somewhere between a more naturalistic looking guy and some kind of creature. So we'll just have to see exactly where that ends up. So yeah, just going to give this a few seconds. If you're watching the live or the non-live version of this, or recorded version of this afterwards, you can probably just skip a few minutes ahead. If you're watching the live version, you will just have to sit and wait for a tiny bit. So I can just talk about my approach for this before we really get started. So I'm going to be using the Flip Normal's anatomy bust as a base for my sculpting, or rather I'm going to be using it as a reference. I'm going to be starting this from a sphere. So this is going to be just my reference on the side. I find this to be very useful when it comes to sculpting, just because this has kind of all my notes. Instead of having reference in 10 different images when it comes to pure anatomy, we made this one here just to have one model with all the reference. So that's going to be help us a ton. So I use this for all my characters whenever I'm sculpting anything, and I just put him up here as well. So I have him right there. It's really useful to put models up here, stuff you use a lot. Just chucking this right in here. I'm actually going to be starting from just a plane here, actually from this model here. This is a generic plane model that I've just modified just a little bit. The default plane model, I think, yeah, this is the default one, which comes with ZBrush. You can find this under tools. I think it's under projects, and it's one of these guys here. Here we go. The problem with these models here, this is the default female one. The problem with this is that this is just too planar. The head doesn't look like this. It's useful for the face to have planes, but the back of the skull is just not planar. It's round, right? So I find it to be much more useful to start off with something like this, where I've just softened off all the shapes. So I'm just going to put this up here like so. Here's a question we keep getting over and over again, which is a very good one. I should probably make a video about this at some point. Are drawing skills necessary to be a good digital sculptors? And it's not. The reason we know it's not needed is because there are tons of great sculptors, tons of great artists out there who don't know how to draw. If it was a requirement, then you would see that every single character artist would know how to draw, and that's just not the case. My drawing skills are like okay. You know, I could probably like improve them quite a lot just by drawing a fair bit, just to de-rusting them. But my sculpting skills far exceed my drawing skills. What is useful though is a fundamental understanding of observation, which you definitely can get from drawing, but at the same time you can also kind of be decent at drawing and still kind of suck at it, in the sense that you rely on copying photos. If you just try to sculpt this or draw this guy, you can draw a perfect one-to-one portrait of him without actually really understanding it. It's more of a technical copying exercise. So I had this where I would do these kind of portraits when I was in high school and such, and then I got to university and I thought I actually knew something about drawing, and I realized I didn't at all, because it was just copying it. If you're just copying, then sure, you're not like regressing, right? But you might improve a little bit, but the best way to get better at sculpting is honestly to just sculpt a lot. Do you guys have any plans to release a female anatomy course to pair up with the recent male one? So the recent one isn't really a male course per se. The final result, we are of course sculpting a like more of a guy. It's more of a stylized character in a sense, more of a Hulk kind of character, but it's not really a male or female course. It's more just core human anatomy. The differences between men and women in terms of anatomy are so tiny compared to the similarities between people. So it would be more like, you can have a chapter on it. What's the differences between male and female bodies? But in terms of like the muscle layout, the fat, skin, all that kind of stuff is the same. Distribution is a bit different. The size is a bit different on the length of bones or whatever, but like it's fundamentally the same thing. So that's something we actually talk about in the anatomy course, that you have. I'm going to be drawing a little bit here. We have bone, we have muscle, we have fat, and we have skin. And what you can do with these is it's almost like a character slider, where if you were in a game, right, where you can go from short bones to long bones, this is going to change the height of the character, where men are more over here, women are more over here. And muscle, men are more over here, women are more over here. Women are generally have a higher fat percentage than men, so they're over here and here. And skin, they'll be like, how elastic is it? So it's really a case of dragging some sliders around. It's not the case of, if you're sculpting a woman versus a man, it's not the case that you need to invent a whole new thing, unless of course you're talking about more about like the reproductive systems, whatever, but we don't really care about that for a pure artist point of view. So yeah, there's not going to be a second part to that. But cool, let's get started with sculpting. So I'm going to take this guy here, just copy him over to this one here, and we probably just have to do a little bit of rescaling. Yeah, just scale him up a little bit. And then I'm just going to be playing around with him just a little bit. So I'm just going to move him down, and then I have a little magical hotkey that is going to be doing a split screen. So I'm not really going to be using this right away. I'm just going to be working in solo mode and just experimenting, just playing around with this, seeing what I feel like today. I don't really have a crazy agenda for this, to be honest. I'm also playing with a brush pack as well. So I want to release at some point, I think it would be fun to do a Flip Normal's brush kit. So here is one of the brushes I've been playing around with for that. It's a clay brush. So it's a bit of it's very similar to clay buildup. It uses the clay buildup as a start, but it has more texture to it. So I really like this one. But no official word on this one yet. This is just me spending a few hours just playing around with some of these brushes. So I'm just trying to get in some core anatomy for this, just playing around with this just a little bit. And once I have some shapes, I'll just see where I take it. I genuinely don't know where I'm going to be taking this, guys. So you guys get to see my honest progress on this today. Well, in tutorials, we're more structured, where we always sculpt the character beforehand, because otherwise you might waste 6 hours just having to resculpt things and you can't really follow it. So this is my actual honest approach to just sculpting characters, and that means that this might look terrible at the end. So that's just how it is. It doesn't always work out. Even though if you were to follow the bone, muscle, fat, skin approach, it's going to look natural in a sense that it could belong in the world. But just because it looks natural does not mean that it's an appealing sculpt. You can kind of think about this as like an actor before and after makeup and costume, that you have somebody who looks kind of generic and boring in real life, and then they put on costume and they go into character and they look phenomenal. So that's kind of the same thing here. Even though you have somebody who looks that they feel like they belong in the world, does not mean that it is an interesting sculpt. But that's the first goal, at least, that you should be able to sculpt something that feels like it belongs in the world. If you can't sculpt something that belongs in the world, then you really can't make it interesting either. So knowing the anatomy is really important, and that's how you make it look like it belongs in the world. You just get the anatomy right. So just getting in some core anatomy with this. I could, of course, just start sculpting directly from the anatomy bust here, but I find this to be, it almost has a bit too much detail for just a starting point. So it's very easy to get locked into something. That's a problem with having base meshes or starting from something like that. It's really easy it just looks like the base mesh in the end. Also, the reason we're sculpting now is to celebrate our back to school sale where all Flip Normal's exclusives are 30% off, and a lot of our products are something like 28,000 products on the Flip Normal's marketplace, just flipnormals.com, are between something like 20 and 70% off. Some I believe are like up to 80% off. So tons of really good deals there, including the aforementioned anatomy course as well, which is currently 30% off. So just trying to get a bit of a base. I really like this brush as well. This is not to shield the brush pack, because the brush pack does not exist and may never exist. I'm just experimenting with brushes, just playing around with that. Or really the only thing I've done, I just made an alpha in Photoshop, just looks like this. And I just modified the settings a little bit. When it comes to custom brushes and such, you can do quite a lot of cool stuff with very little. The default brushes are really good. And if you were to have better brushes, you wouldn't necessarily sculpt better. You might be able to sculpt a bit faster or get a bit more specific, but it's not necessarily going to look better. I'm currently in school for character design. What specific tools in ZBrush would be very useful for me to create monsters and creatures? That would be C-spheres, master C-spheres. Get to know C-spheres if you want to get good at making characters and creatures. It's going to help you tremendously with that. I'll show you some of we have some products as well that are very useful for creating characters and creatures as well. That I might actually just be able to show that here. Yeah, we actually have some here. This is called the Flip Normal's Creature Kit. So this is something we made years ago, but still a very useful kit where we have things like horns. This is why a lot of my characters have horns, because we have a kit for it. So I just kind of chuck in some horns. So this kind of stuff, right? This is very useful. You can just play around with this and just give the character some horns. We have a bunch of different things. So we have eyes as well. Actually, I'm going to just experiment with the eyes. So we have here we just have a socket. So actually, let me just play around with this with the creature kit. We have mouths as well. We have tons of stuff here. So I'm just going to make this a little bit flatter because the creature kit prefers that. Basically, it's a series of VDM brushes, and VDM brushes prefers flat surfaces. That's when they work the best. So we're just going to play around with some eyes. Let's see, maybe the crocodile one works pretty well. Oh, for this, we just need some more resolution as well. We are in Dynamesh. I'm just going to see what happens when I click this. Okay. And then we're just gonna get some crocodile ears, eyes in here. Yeah, I can work with this one. The advantage of this as well is that, like of the creature kit, it's not necessarily just so that it's faster to sculpt, because you might be able to sculpt these ones. It shouldn't take that long. It would take maybe like 10 minutes or so. The advantage is that you can iterate so much faster. You can see how I can play around with designs incredibly fast, and some of these are like I'm liking, and some of these I'm not really connecting with. So it's a really cool idea to play around with this kind of stuff. Yeah, the software I'm using here is Purif. Purif is absolutely brilliant. I always found it incredible how you can sculpt without using the smooth brush. Yeah, that just takes some time to get used to. The advantage of sculpting without the smooth brush, it's not like it's a rule, right? Like, who cares how you sculpt? The advantage of it though is that you get to really control the shape. The smooth brush is a bit treacherous to some degree if you don't know how to control it, because it's basically a blur brush, so it blurs the shapes. So you want to be a little bit aware of that if stuff gets a bit too if stuff gets too soft, your sculpt is not going to work properly. So just be aware of that. And we're just trying to look for what brush I'm looking for here. I'm looking for a mouth brush. We should have a mouth brush here somewhere. Here we go. Flip Normal's mouth. Cool. Let's see what we can play around with here. Not loving this. It's kind of cool. Human lips, maybe. I think we're just going to sculpt this from scratch, to be honest, to see where we end up. And then, yeah, just having fun with this. Just going to bring back Purif here. and just seeing where we'll take this one. Often I find myself just having to experiment with things. I just have to take something in one direction, and then we can go from here. So maybe for this, I'll just start with just making his going into this direction here, and then we can always change it. That's just how it works with a lot of designs. You don't really know where it's going to go from, where it's going to go in the beginning. You just have to experiment, and you just have to go through a bunch of iterations to get to the final result. The advantage of knowing anatomy, like actually studying facial anatomy and such, is that you can kind of sculpt anything with confidence. You need, of course, reference to validate that you're not entirely off, but it's a really good way to just making sure that you have a credible background in whatever you're doing. So if you're sculpting some kind of ogre or a cute little girl or an old woman or something, fundamentally the anatomy is all the same, like what we mentioned before, with like difference between men and women, that it's all fundamentally the same, but then you're changing the shape around for it. So this just means that you can very quickly get to those results, and you can use the reference more for specific shape reference instead of, actually, where does the cheekbones go? The cheekbones are going to be basically in the same spot no matter who you're sculpting. You can move them up and down a little bit, change the volumes a little bit, but it's not like some people are going to have cheekbones like going down here or something, or up here. They're all going to be fairly consistent. Here's a good question. I'm a self-taught 3D artist, been sculpting, learning anatomy for 7 months. I reached a decent. Now I don't know what to practice and learn next. I want to work in games. This is where I think we need to talk about the sale. This is where we made products specifically for this. So it's really hard to learn this kind of stuff by yourself, but we have made some courses for you. So these are 30% off, and the first one is actually the second one. Let's talk about actually we can start talking about this one. This is Introduction to Anatomy. This came out about a month ago or so. This is where you learn the actual anatomy, like step by step, and like how muscles attach, making characters start to finish, this kind of stuff. This is very useful. Another one that's very useful as well as a companion to this is Introduction to Sculpting. Introduction to Sculpting is where I recommend that you go. This is where you just get started with knowing the basics of the tools. What brushes do you use? How do you do some stylized sculpting? How do you sculpt a full character, like a full bust from scratch? What is anatomy? What is a muscle? All that. So this is going to serve as a really good base for you. I'm going to post these two links in the chat here. And so Introduction to Anatomy and Introduction to Sculpting, I highly recommend these ones. So we made those specifically for people who are in that situation that I need to I've sculpted for a while. I don't know where to take it from here. What do I do? So I highly recommend those. There is no substitute for just doing the work as well. Like you basically have like 3 things you need in order to get better. You need quality instructions, which is what you get from these courses. Then you need to just practice a lot, and then you need feedback as well from your work. The Flip Almost Discord is good for feedback. I also have a mentorship as well for feedback as well, but this stream is not about that. And but at least you need quality instructions. So in order to get quality instructions, I just recommend some of our courses. We also have a lot of videos on our YouTube channel as well for sculpting, so check those out as well. Obviously those are entirely free, and yeah, we'll just teach you so much about sculpting. At least that's the goal. Here's a very common anatomy mistake, by the way. I haven't done this here, but this is very common, where the nose goes up here. Let's say the nose goes here, and then you start with the mouth from here. This is super common, but if you look at the reference here, it goes up like so. Then around like halfway or at 1/3 mark, it starts to go down. So this is incredibly common to do, that you just push it up all the way here. So a remedy for this is basically just to just straighten this off around here. Like this is something that every single person has been doing at some point in their sculpting lives. Just trying to push some proportions a little bit more. Just playing around with that. Moving some stuff forward. This might turn into a goblin. Who knows? If I know myself correctly, this is goblin time. But let's see. This brush here is so new that I haven't even mapped it to a hotkey. So that's why I keep going into the brush menu. The cool thing about this brush, or like any kind of clay brush or anything like that, is that like there was somebody asking or talking about the smooth brush before. If you're like, notice this area here, like this is quite textured now, but I can make this entirely smooth without even touching the smooth brush. Just like going over this multiple times and just refining it, lower and lower and lower the intensities on the brush, and you're just gonna get a result that's very nice and clean. It's not necessarily clean in the fact that it's perfectly smooth, because then if you want that, then you should just use a smooth brush. But it's clean in the sense that the shape is fundamentally clean. It's a strong, clean shape. And then you can of course use a smooth brush, right, to like really simplify it down. Here's a good one. What will you say is different in your anatomy course that you can find in other courses like Nico and others? It's a tricky one, right? First, I haven't watched Nico. I haven't watched every single course out there, but anatomy is just complicated, and every single instructor, they have a different way of explaining things. So I haven't taken every anatomy course in existence, but I've taken a lot of them, and I looked at a lot of different courses in preparation for Intro to Anatomy, and every single time somebody explains something to you, you're gonna learn something new. So like Nico is a fantastic teacher, but just hearing other people explain kind of the same thing in different ways is really useful as well. One of the things that our course is good at is trying to break it away from just pure technical anatomy. We do of course cover the correct anatomical names and such, but it also focuses on how do you simplify things down. For instance, like the forearm, people will sometimes go in and they're just like external carpi radialis longus, brevis, external, like all these kind of crazy muscles. But we just go in and simplify them down into like ways you can understand anatomy. So we do go into the depth as well, of course, but instead of starting there, do going like, okay, this is the anterior superior iliac spine. We're going like, look at the hips. It's shaped like Mickey Mouse ears with a little thing in the middle and a little triangle in the back. And this line here is important, right? And then we have a thing going out. And we're just getting way more, starting with the simplification. Because if you have a simple symbol in your head, a way to understand it in a more of an abstract sense, anatomy becomes so much easier. If you're starting off with anatomy, just getting off into incredibly complex names and terms and everything right away, it's just stupidly hard. This is how I started off with anatomy, where nobody really taught me that, well, actually you can simplify the arms into a series of just balloons, and that's going to work for the majority of cases. It was more just, all right, cool, external carpi radialis brevis mixes in with the longus at the anterior border of whatever, and that's just really, really, really hard. It would be like if you're trying to learn a language and you don't really do basic vocab, you just get thrown into like a telenovela, and that stuff is just difficult. What is next after anatomy for if you want to learn sculpting? So you just have to sculpt a lot. Honestly, once you have like an introduction to anatomy and like you actually understand the concepts and you understand like a lot of the sculpting concepts and you have a decent sculpting technique, you just have to sculpt a lot. There is just no substitute for that. You just need to output a lot. If you're not outputting but you have a significant knowledge of anatomy, well then you don't actually have a significant knowledge of anatomy in terms of in any practical way. You're just sitting on purely theoretical knowledge, and that's just not good for anyone. So you just have to output, just produce a significant amount of work. The best way I've found to learn sculpting is to first, sculpt a lot. It's an obvious one, but sculpt from reference. In this case here, right, we're sculpting from reference, and then just getting in and being highly analytical of the reference. Try to copy the reference one-to-one. There is definitely a time and place for creativity, but if you're doing a study, you shouldn't try to be creative whatsoever with that. You should just try to do a full copy, because then you have your reference here and you have your sculpt, and now you can get a delta between these two, meaning that you actually have a clear difference. Like in this case, let's for sake of argument, I haven't really tried to accurately do it. See here, this is more of a straighter line, but mine goes like this. And that means that if this was a study, we're like, well, actually, my understanding is this, and the actual thing is this. That means I actually have to understand that this straightens up more. You can see here, the distance between this is much bigger than this. That means I need to pull the eyes forward. So it's such a shortcut to sculpt based on reference, and not just excusing things with like, oh, but I didn't understand this or something. Or it's my style. You're just trying to copy exactly what's there, and then you're going to improve so much faster. Of course, you need to do creative things as well. You need to have fun with sculpting as well. But when you're learning it, and if you're finding that your work isn't good enough, then doing just studies, hardcore studies where we try to recreate something, like buy a reference pack, try to recreate that, buy a scan. The reason I'm saying buy a scan versus not just like find on Google is just because if you were to get like reference pack from like the likes of Graphit, let's see if we can find this here without YouTube banning us for not safe for work, like this kind of stuff here, for instance, right? We did implement a mature filter, so half of these are just blurred. So like stuff like this, right? If you want to learn facial expressions, it's like 1800 pieces of reference, right? This kind of stuff is just like it's an order of magnitude stronger than anything you'll find. So find some kind of reference pack. Graphit is probably the best on the market. I haven't seen anything that's close to this. Find this kind of stuff. They often have turntables of each pose, and then try to sculpt it. Do your best and sculpt it. The best thing you can do is to sculpt it from a sphere or a C-sphere or something. Starting with base mesh is a bit of a cop-out, because a base mesh has so much volume already, meaning that a lot of the hard stuff in sculpting has been solved for you. Tricky things in sculpting is to get volumes right. Core, simple, basic volumes, clean, good shapes. And that is in a large part just been solved in a base mesh. So you don't want to deprive yourself of that learning. You really want to be sure that you're getting in as much proper learning as you can. And the problem with that is you're going to feel like crap doing it. Honestly, the work is going to suck. Like the studies are not going to look very good, at least for some time. But that's good, right? It means if they were looking good, that means that you would probably be deprived of learning. Like if you start from base mesh, right, or were to project a scan or something, then it would look better, but you're deprived of a lot of learning. You want to set yourself up for constructive failure. The difference between failure and constructive failure is if you're doing like a study, let's say you're going to do a study of this guy here, and you're doing like, okay, 2 hours, and I'm going to do the best I can in 2 hours, and then we're going to learn as much from this as possible, then you do this and you learn a lot from this. That's constructive failure. You're setting yourself up for that. Bad failure is, I'm going to do a portfolio piece of this guy here. I'm going to spend 2 months on it, and then I need just a portfolio piece of that at the end. And then it doesn't look good because you don't have the core skills. That's like bad failure. That's a kind of failure that you're like, oh man, okay, yeah, sure, I learned something from this, but what I learned was mostly that I wasted 2 months. So doing like simple exercises is very useful. One of the reasons why it's so useful to do these kind of 2-hour exercises is that often the learning you get within 2 hours is the same learning you would have after like 2 months or something. Like if you have a fundamental misunderstanding of how the cheekbones work, and you were to spend 2 months on a study versus like 2 hours, like the issue is still going to be there in the 2 months one. So if you were to do, let's say 2 hours, right, that for a study, that's 4 studies you can do a day, maybe 5 studies, depending on how crazy you are. Then that's like, it's a lot of studies per week. That's 20 studies per week. And then you're timing this times like 8, right? Like you're doing like hundreds of studies. And what you're going to learn more from, hundreds of studies or like 1 study. So this is what I mean. Constructive failure is incredibly useful. But the caveat is that you have to set yourself up for it. You have to analyze it afterwards. If you're just kind of doodling around, then, and you're not really looking at reference, you're just sculpting for like 200 hours, sure, that's useful to some degree. But if you have reference and you're analytical about it, 200 hours worth or 100 hours worth of analytical sculpting is going to be worth like 1,000 hours of just mindless doodling. Yeah, this is a question we keep getting. Basically, how do we do the internal, like the mouth cavity? This is something I just have to make a video on because we keep getting this question over and over again. I don't really have any reference for you, but this is something we just have to make a video on. Essentially, the short version is the mouth goes up something like this for the lips, and then you have, it goes down here. This is where you have the teeth, goes up like so, goes all the way back here, a little bit more forward, goes more like this, and then it's the same thing for the front. For the bottom lip, it goes like this, then it goes up here. This is where you have your teeth, tooth, and then it continues down, and then you have the tongue, and then it basically continues here. This is the gist of it. And the important thing is that it has to continue further back until you can no longer see the gap. Because if you were to, like what people do, they end it here, and then somebody's opening your mouth or screaming, and you can tell that it's blocked here. Is learning to sculpt photorealistic figures too much to get into the industry? Isn't it better to learn how to sculpt stylized characters? Honestly, it depends on what you want to do, right? If you want to work at a studio or freelance, and the only thing you want to do is you want to sculpt stylized characters, then you should definitely focus on that. Like, let's say you only want to work at Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks kind of thing. Then yeah, for sure, like then definitely focus on that. But if you're trying to get into like AAA gaming or VFX or something, then it's a very, very good idea to focus on realistic characters, even if you are focusing on stylized stuff. It's still a very good idea to learn realistic characters, not necessarily from a portfolio point of view, but because if you know how to do something on a realistic character, then it's much easier to stylize it. If you know the proper anatomy, then simplifying the anatomy is a lot easier than trying to kind of wing correct anatomy. So I highly recommend, no matter what, that you at least study the real world. It would be like if you're trying to be an animator, right, for Disney or Pixar or anything like that, and sure, they're stylized, but doing realistic life drawing is going to help you a ton to capture the life. It's the same thing with the stylized characters as well. The more you can capture from real life, the more you can put that back into your your actual stylized work. What are your methods for sculpting clean armor with ornaments? Honestly, I wouldn't sculpt that. I would model that with traditional hard surface techniques. And then if you need like ornaments on it, then you could like straight up project that on top in ZBrush, or you can do that with like in Paint or something, using normal maps, or just display some maps there. The way I think about it is the whole, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You don't want to be a hammer in 3D, meaning you don't want to consider everything to be either a sculpting or a looked at problem or texturing problem. You want to be holistic about it. If you, let's say you're working as a sculptor, then every issue looks like a sculpting issue. So how do we do pores? We sculpt them. How do we do the armor? We sculpt it. But if you're thinking more holistically about it, then how do you do pores? Well, maybe we sculpt them. Maybe we do them texturing. Maybe we do them Mari. Maybe we do them Paint, or maybe we do them entirely procedurally using some kind of crazy noise hack in Mari or Houdini or something. How do we do armor? Well, we could model it hard surface using box cutter in Blender, or there are so many ways of doing it. So I highly recommend not being locked into one way of doing it. Zoom out and look at the problem more holistically, instead of just how do I do this? How do I do task X with tool Y? Just what's the best way to solve it? Yeah, do you have a course where you only teach those things? If you go up in a little bit in the chat here now, you can see the Intro to Anatomy and Intro to Sculpting. Like, I highly recommend those courses. Basically, those two courses is where I've put down kind of everything I know about about sculpting. I probably want to do a version 2 of Intro to Anatomy, something like advanced, or sorry, Intro to Sculpting, where it's called like advanced sculpting, where you can really get more into a lot of different things. But it's a highly comprehensive course on that. So if you're new to sculpting, I really recommend those ones. This is an interesting one from Kitten. What puts me off from the anatomy course is the final sculpture seems to have started from base mesh. I know it's to save time, but it feels like additional learning opportunity was skipped. Honestly, not really. If you were to look at like the breakdown of it, like this is where we are starting from a base mesh, but this is more just to get like some main proportions or something right. So yeah, it is to save some time, but you can really see that we're carving things into it. It's not a case of we're starting with base mesh and we're just kind of like blocking it out a little bit, moving some stuff around. No, we carve things in. We're like properly get stuff in here with the hips and properly get stuff in. So we're basically recreating the whole sculpture step by step by step. So it looks, between these ones here, it looks really, really bad because we're just properly getting into it. Let's see if there are any screenshots of that. So it's definitely not a case where we're just kind of blocking in the where we're just kind of moving stuff around and all that. Like it's a fairly in-depth version of that. So yeah, there wasn't any screenshots of that. But I mean, it's a fair concern, right? That yeah, I wish we were showing the whole thing. But keep in mind, the Intro to Anatomy course as well it's not just about sculpting a character. That's part 2. Part 1 is all about just learning the theory of it, where are the bones, what muscles are there and such. And then in part 2, we're applying all of it. Okay, I'm gonna mess this guy up now. What I'm doing now is, I've talked about this briefly in past streams, but I like to separate the sculpting into 2 stages. Anatomy and design, and really I've been doing a little bit of both now, but I'm doing a lot of anatomy. But now I can zoom out and just look at the design, and it looks okay, but it looks a little bit boring. The eyes are too far apart, which my girlfriend always makes fun of me for, because I always make the eyes too far apart. So I just do a sanity check now. Or not even sanity check, I just automatic thing. I just move the eyes closer because I just know that's something I have an issue with. So then we just got to push it. Just look at the silhouette and see how you can push this kind of stuff. We can push the nose out significantly more. And whenever you're doing this, don't worry if you mess up construction or anything like this. This is just so we can just experiment with the design. Here as well, you want to, it's helpful to think about different elements and relation to the size. Right now, these two are kind of the same in terms of size. So this is where it's helpful if one is dominant. So maybe you want the nose to be dominant and the cheek here to be, or the chin here to be smaller, or the opposite. So, making one of them more dominant, I find to be very helpful, just to play more with the designer being more in charge of the general shapes. Also here you can see it was from a generic base mesh here, so I want to really push this forward, like hunching him properly over. I find that stuff to be really important. Whenever you're making a character like this, it's important to not just think about it as it's a bust connected via neck to a body. No, it's a whole thing. You have to think about the whole posture of him. If this guy here is like this guy looks like almost like the food critic from Ratatouille, where he's like properly hunched over. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. What is his posture? Here's a good question from Ian. Greetings, best wishes. I have a question. Why do modern sculptors and artists always only create ugly stuff like zombies and orcs? Because it's a lot of fun. It's like there are a lot of pretty things in this world, like go down any street, look at any billboard filled with beautiful people. I just kind of like to make fantasy things. I just like to make orcs and ogres and things that look nasty. The world has a lot of beauty in it. Let's make some nasty things as well. Honestly, I just think it's fun. I just find it to be a lot more fun to do something ugly than to do something that's really pretty. But I like how you put sculptors and artists in quotation marks. Don't really know what to make of that, but I will take that. So you can see how much more interesting he got just from moving things around. Now we can also just play around with this as well. Move his cheekbones up a little bit. See what we can do with this. Maybe we can make his ears giant or maybe tiny. We can try that, making his ears really tiny and maybe further back like so as well. Yeah, that's kind of cool. We can make them go a bit further out. The inflate brush is brilliant for this because you can just add volumes to this now. Do you usually use a base mesh for a character to progress faster, or do you start from scratch? That is a great question, and that's something that requires a bit of an explanation. If you want, you can optimize for basically two things when it comes to creating characters. You can optimize for the final result looking really good, or you can optimize for learning, and under learning, that's also where I put fun. So where for this one here, I don't actually care if this looks good or not at the end. What I care about is me having fun in the stream now, just doodling around and playing around with proportions and just having fun with them. So if I'm just trying to have fun, or in this case, let's assume I'm trying to learn as much as possible, you are going to learn a hell of a lot more if you are starting from from nothing. Basically, the less you're starting from, the easier or the harder it's going to become. You can think about this as the coloring books you have as a kid. What's hardest, starting from blank sheet of paper if you want to color something in, or having something where the lines are already drawn? Doing a base mesh is a bit like drawing something where the lines have already been drawn and you have to just color in. It is of course more complicated than that, but it's akin to that. So that means if you're starting in production and let's say you make the same characters over and over again, which is what you do, people are fundamentally the same, then like if you're making like just people, any kind of person, you can make a generic base mesh that is really the same. This would be similar to having the line art done for you, and now you're just using Liquify to move this into place, and then the work is to color them in. But even the coloring in that case is still kind of the same, right? Like people aren't that different when it comes to skin either. Again, not in a fundamental way. We have a range of skin color and all that. So you can really make something that would fit a lot of different people. And if you were to do that, then first off, a lot of the hard things in a sculpt are just solved. Like anatomy is fundamentally the same, proportions are fundamentally the same, and then you can spend your time making it look unique. While if you're starting from scratch every single time, you have to troubleshoot so much. So if you start from scratch, you're going to learn a lot because you have to troubleshoot a lot, and it's legit difficult to start from scratch. So if you're learning, then it's a fantastic idea to start from scratch. That's what I do with the students I have for the mentorship I'm doing, where I'm like, sculpt this dude from a sphere. Then you're going to be kind of in trouble. It's a legit hard thing to do, but make this guy from a base mesh isn't that tricky to do. Meaning if you're starting from a sphere, you have to understand a lot of the anatomy. But if you're starting from a base mesh, you can get 80% of the way just by using the move brush. So the question kind of depends on what you want to do. For instance, if I need to concept something up real quick, like for instance for the, let me show you this, for the intro to anatomy one that I had right here, so intro to sculpting, for this guy here, I always sculpt characters before I do the course. So when we're sculpting this guy here in the course, this is like the second time I'm sculpting, so we have reference and such for him. But when I'm sculpting this guy here, I'm working, I had a scan and I bashed him into it, and I sculpted the eyebrows and getting the eyes and the beard and all that kind of stuff, sculpting this in, and it meant that I was able to make the concept like 3-4 times as quick, simply because the anatomy was solved for me. In that case, I didn't care about having fun or learning or anything. I just wanted the final result to look as good as possible in as short amount of time as I possibly could, and it worked. But if you want to learn something and you keep cheating, you're just optimizing for the wrong thing, then you're depriving yourself of a significant amount of learning. just experimenting with them with a few different shapes, trying to look at the reference as well, trying to just play around with some different shapes. What's interesting in purely anatomically is that you have the skull underneath the whole thing. Kind of makes sense, but if you start to look at the nose here, this is around where the skull is, and then the rest is cartilage. So you often see this in reference that goes one way and then it kind of changes direction and such, because the skull just goes, skull is bone, right? Bone does not deform. So this is where you can have a very clear plane change right here. That the skull goes up and then maybe the cartilage continues, or maybe the cartilage goes another way. Nikolai Nadenhove also says to use a focal length of around 80 millimeters is recommended when doing portrait sculpts, and he's a very good sculptor. Yeah, 80 mil is pretty decent. That's what you'll be using when for this. I'm just using the default of like 50, but that's what you'll be probably using if you're taking photos of people, like with a real camera. Then you'd be using, like, I'm not a portrait photographer, but you be in that range. What you want is you want to accurately assess what the character actually looks like, which means that if you're sculpting without any kind of focal length, any kind of camera active perspective enabled, that means that once you put this into shot, it's going to look completely different. So it's important to review it with basically the focal length that's going to be in the final shot. Let's say you're working in a movie, for a movie, then the focal length changes from shot to shot. Like it's all over the place, right? In some it's going to be like 100, and some it's going to be like 20, right? Like it just depends on the director. But if you're working for a game, for instance, where you're going to be seeing the character through the same lens throughout the whole game, let's say that's a 50 millimeter lens, then you really want to be sure that the character works for a 50 millimeter lens. Focal length is it's a bigger topic than you might assume. It's not just use this focal length. It really depends a lot. It's also something you have to deal with when it comes to references as well. So, for instance, if you were to look at some reference and you're trying to figure out the focal length, it's really difficult to figure out exactly which one it is, particularly if you're overlaying things. So let's assume that we have a focal length here of like 18. Looks entirely different. Like it's a whole different character than 85. Like it doesn't even look like the same character, right? So this is where you just have to be aware of that if you're trying to overlay something, let's say you were to have perfect lined up cameras of, like, let's say it's like this guy here, but you have like a turntable of him, so you have like 10 images of him, like from all angles, but they're all from different focal lengths, and you're trying to just align it with one focal length. Like it's never ever going to match, and it's going to look beyond terrible. So that's just something you have to be aware of. So I'm kind of liking where this is going now. This is where I would want to shoot references of myself. I would try to go into this pose myself, and then just make this look cool. For this, I still want a little bit of a lip here as well, because he doesn't really have a lip right now. So I'm just gonna bring this in a little bit. It's very useful to define the corner of the mouth here as well. Properly just carving this in. Oh, first time I'm using the smooth brush today. I use a smooth brush if I want to remove something, like to destroy things, or to, like, as a finalizing pass towards the end. I haven't actually used this one yet. I said in the beginning I was going to use the Flip Normals Anatomy bus for this. Haven't really done that, so I'm just gonna not just continue. I'm just gonna continue sculpting from this. Gonna try to get in some of the more specific shapes I'm seeing here as well from the ref. Don't be afraid to carve things in, and and just redirect shapes and re-sculpt them. If something doesn't work, it's got to go, right? Then it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter how much time you spent on it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Just doing a little Dynamesh here. We're up to around 700,000 at the moment. Don't be afraid of adding resolution either to it. It's pretty common that I see this a lot with my students, that they're too afraid of adding resolution, can't get the shapes they need in. So by subdividing or adding more resolution to your model, then you can see new patterns that you can't see before. Henning, what would you say on how important a nice looking cover letter is when applying for jobs? Do people just skip the online portfolio? Or can you make a difference with or skip to the online portfolio? Can make a difference with nice application? The way I think about it is you have a lot of competition, so be sure that everything is nice. Don't skip any of the steps in terms of a cover letter or a nice CV and such. The cover letter is where they can get to know you as a person. Like, you don't have to like list that I went to kindergarten here or high school here or something, but just, what kind of things are you interested in? What kind of person are you? So it's definitely a way to introduce yourself to the company, but at the same time, the company primarily cares about somebody who can do the job, right? Yes, it's important to have a good team dynamic, but can't even tell if somebody is good for team dynamic through just a cover letter. You need more of an interview for that. So essentially, the most important thing by far is your portfolio. Spend time on the cover letter, make sure that it's well written, make sure to remove any kind of typos, grammatical issues and all that. It should be well formatted, but it can be kind of boring, to be honest. Don't try to reinvent the wheel here. Don't try to be funny or don't try to do anything too crazy here. But yeah, just spend time on it. And same with your CV as well. Make sure it's well formatted and it just works. Look for reference for this as well. See how other people have solved the CV and cover letter problem. But I can't stress enough how important it is to not focus too much on this compared to a portfolio. I see a lot of people focus on the wrong things when it comes to this. They're spending a lot of time on custom websites and making the CV letter or the cover letter and all that kind of stuff, networking on LinkedIn and all that, instead of just getting good at what you're doing. If you want a job, focus on getting good. Everything else is kind of secondary, to be honest. Of course, you need to be a good person, all that kind of stuff, have good soft skills, but it's hard to work directly on that. The biggest thing you can do if you want a job is to just get good at what you're doing. If you want to make a portfolio and you're good at what you're doing, it's 10 times easier to make a good portfolio. If you want to get a big social media presence, it's a lot easier. Then you post your work in progress and your sketches and just your work, and over time you build a network there as well. So just focus on the important things and don't waste too much time on things that aren't that important. Like, I don't know, obviously this would depend from studio to studio, but I can't imagine that if somebody has a generic fine cover letter, that would make or break it. It's like, as long as it's not a crazy person cover letter, like actually like it's just the ramblings of a madman, or it's you sound like way too arrogant or not a team player or anything like that, then I can't imagine that's going to make a huge impact in hiring, because you would definitely need interviews to figure out all these kind of things. Hopefully that answers your question. Basically, good cover letter, crappy portfolio, you're never going to get anywhere. Can you show the sculpt from the top? Yes, James, I most certainly can. Let's see if I can. This is what it looks like from the top view. I'm just going to move it a bit more like this. So you can just pause the stream and take a screenshot if you want. I find this to be a very useful view, by the way. I find that a lot of people, they make this too flat here, or they make it go inwards. So I find it to be really useful to have more of a triangle and to have this be more of a shape like this. What view do you neglect most often? I assume you mean sculpting view and not like a personal view. 3/4 on the back. Get this view here right. 3/4 on the front as well is also very useful, but 3/4 on the back and top is very useful. Side view is, obviously all the views are useful, but essential views are absolutely essential views for references, front and side. Like if you have a lot of the other ones, but you're missing a side view, it becomes much harder. So definitely get these ones. But 3/4 back and 3/4 front, this is often when you can properly like nail the likeness, I find. Oh, this is a good one. What are differences between good ref and bad when it comes to sculpting faces? I have to think about that one for a sec. Good reference is something I find to be, there is unity within all the pieces of reference. Like it's one person and they're from different angles with good lighting. This here is excellent lighting. It's very high contrast. You can see what's going on. This is also very good lighting. But the problem with this kind of ref is that this ref is all different. Like if I try to sculpt this guy's eyes and then I try to go back to this guy, they're conflicting, right? Like they're same with this guy, or they're all completely different. So it means that you're not going to be able to sculpt a cohesive character. You need just a lot of different reference from basically like one person. That's what I was talking about before with like reference packs, where reference packs are so good because that's exactly what you're getting in that regard. Stuff that's also important is the lighting. Lighting just needs to be good. If the lighting is too flat or it's all in darkness, then it's not going to help you a crazy amount. So definitely make sure that the lighting is contrasty. Black and white is quite useful as well, because then you're not going to be distracted with color, for instance. The best reference for me by far is scan reference, like proper scan reference, not like super cleaned up scan reference, because there's a lot of things lost in that. Like either just really high quality scan reference or actually like raw scans, because then you can just see exactly what's there and then you can kind of fill in the blanks. But yeah, like that definitely like some stuff that is important when it comes to good reference. A lot of variety within one piece, one person, and different angles of it. Good lighting. Also, ideally, you know the focal length used. I can try to make his ears bigger as well, because I like that on this guy here. One thing I notice actually on Pinterest now, I often go to Pinterest for reference, is that, my God, there's a lot of AI crap there now. Like, not just like there are some AI images here and there, but like it's presented as real world reference. Like it's presented as photos of people. And I can usually tell, but in some cases you really can't tell, particularly if it's more of a blurry photo or something. There's some processing, some noise or something on top of it. And it's really, really bad for reference, because I can't trust that it's a real thing. And then I might make mistakes in it because of the it's an amalgamation of it's a hard word, of bunch of different people. So that's something I only like properly noticed like recently now, that my god, there's a lot of useless stuff there. I think that's just kind of the issue I have with it. It's just generally useless for what I need. I need this kind of stuff. I need photos of people. What's the best time to switch from Dynamesh to subdivs? I find it to be useful to switch when your design is solved. Like for instance here, if I were to switch before this was the ear is solved, then it's very hard to make changes. Maybe I want to cut away the ears, who knows, right? Maybe I want to cut away his nose. Don't know yet. Which means that if you're trying to do that, it's really difficult to do that if you're dealing with subdivisions. So get your design sorted, kind of get your design locked in, and then you can do that. Then you can do subdivs. It's kind of the whole like when do you retopologize, right? So what I prefer to do is even before I properly retopo, I do a quick zero meshing pass, then I just reproject it. Just so that it's a lot easier to sculpt on a proper subd mesh than it is to sculpt on Dynamesh. The shapes are just cleaner and such, and I can go up and down the levels, and it's just much nicer. This is again an advantage of knowing the anatomy, because if you're doing some kind of goblin ears or anything like that, they're just human ears with different proportions. Like what I'm pushing here is obviously it doesn't exist to the same extent on humans, but it's just the anti-helix on the inside. It's fine, we can work with that, right? Here we have the helix, we have the tragus, we have the lobe here, so you know, same thing, just different proportion. Trying to just play around with some shape changes. Here's a good one from Nico. What method do you recommend me to use when trying to learn from the flip normal tutorials? What I find to be very useful when it comes to tutorials is to try to do it myself first. So let's say there is a chapter, let's say it's like Introduction to Modeling for Maya or something, and there's a chapter on like the extrude tool. I would try to like learn about extrusions or like general modeling before I watch the tutorial, because then first I have like aha, I already knew this, that's cool. And second off, when you hear it the second time, it sticks so much more. That was actually one piece of advice my dad gave me when I started, I think, high school, where one of the best ways to learn is to just be one chapter ahead of the teacher, because that way you're already you already know kind of what they're talking about, and it just sticks so much better. So let's say it's like sculpting. Let's say you're trying to follow the intro anatomy course, which is this guy here. So you're trying to sculpt this guy here in the course. Try it beforehand. Like look at the images or like, you know, download the model and that kind of stuff, and just try to sculpt him yourself from the images, and then you see how far you get, and then you can follow the tutorial afterwards. I find it to be exceptionally useful. Figure stuff out first, and then use the tutorial to figure out when you get stuck, or just to give you a different perspective on things. This is how I do it with my teas as well, where I don't teach them first, meaning I don't do a sculpting lecture first, and then I show them, and then they follow, because then they're trying to just copy something. What I do, I give them an assignment, which is like sculpt this dude here, and then you have to sculpt it. Or it was more like sculpt a skinny man in his, like a young skinny man, and then they have to find reference, and they have to figure all that out, and then they're doing the best they can at actually sculpting it, and then they will inevitably make mistakes, right? That's what you're doing when you're new to sculpting, or no matter your experience level, it's still you will make mistakes, and then when they make the mistakes, then we figure out, why did you make the mistakes? What is your misunderstanding of your current understanding of, and how do we fix that? So I find it to be very useful. It's the whole, like what we talked about earlier in the stream, deliberate setting yourself up for deliberate mistakes or constructive mistakes. Because then you're submitting, let's say you're submitted this sculpt here and be like, all right, that's cool, but let's look into X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about how we can improve this going forward. And based on this, your understanding is this. Let's talk about that, and let's improve your understanding of the subject. Yeah, question here or comment for a Vermilion Girl. To be honest, I have a lot of difficulty to make my characters in ZBrush look cool. They always seem like aliens. Honestly, a little tip here. This is kind of cool. You can go to de-alienize your things. You can go to tools, Lightbox tool, and here we have, this is entirely free. This comes with the ZBrush. This is the Ryan Kingsland anatomy model. Brilliant tool. This has tons of anatomy and such. And what you want is you want the skull. So you can take the skull or the bones, you can just cut it away like so, and then we can just do a delete hidden. We can copy this into our dude right here, and then we could just unify it, and then we can just put them in, right? Just see what works. If the skull is, obviously this is more of a stylized sculpt now, but if this was a realistic character and the skull is not matching whatsoever, well, then you're already in trouble. What I always tell people who want to sculpt is get the bones right, and everything else will follow. So if the bones are not in a correct spot, like it just doesn't matter. Like you just can't get something to look realistic. So figure out the skull, and then the rest, I can promise you, will start to follow. And the more you do this, the less of an alien it's going to look like. So obviously I can't use this skull for anything now because I'm doing more of my own thing, right? My own design, more of a fantasy style character. But using real world anatomical reference is a fantastic way of learning. Like it is really one of the better ways of actually learning, of actually improving. Just chucking in a skeleton there, looking at, like, even if it's for a body as well, just throwing in a skeleton, it's going to help so much. So if something looks alien, that means maybe that's because the eyes are too large. Well, if you have a skull, right, well, it's not that difficult to figure out where the eyes go. Well, the eyes, we have a socket around it. They probably go in the center, right? So, and then, cool, the eyeball goes in the center. Where does the eye go? Well, it probably goes on top of this, right? All right, cool. What about the nose? Well, see, the nose goes here, right? So it's probably going to be something like so. Where the lips go? Well, it will probably go around here. You know, we have teeth. It kind of makes sense that lips will go over the teeth. And then suddenly you get a lot of proportions, right? Where would the ear go? Well, let's have a look here. There's a hole right here. It's probably related to hearing, right? So then we can figure this out. And then everything just kind of makes more sense. Where's the jawline? Well, jawline, boom. Where's the chin? Boom. Lips, right? And then you just kind of solve this kind of stuff just by getting in the skull. So this is how you can very easily, not easily, this is one of the things that's simple, but it's not easy to do. Big difference between easy and simple. Simple is something that is, it might be simple, there might be a few simple steps. You want to lose weight, exercise more, eat less. All right, cool. How do you do that? You have like all the nutritional knowledge in the world. All the doctors are talking about certain things. Right? There's so much info here. Yeah, but it is fundamentally about exercising more or eating less. You know, the calorie expenditure. But that's not simple. It's just kind of easy to. It's simple to understand, but it's not easy to do. It's the same thing here as well. Bone, muscle, fat, skin. Get them in that order. All right, cool. Now, spend 5 years practicing that. So a lot of things that aren't really complicated when you break it down, and then they become incredibly complicated when it comes to actually doing it. Easy or simple, but not easy. Do you have any good tip for likeness sculpting? Yeah, a few things. First, you have to get good at just the anatomy. You just have to understand the anatomy. I like to break it down into anatomy and then design. Basically, what is the core anatomy underneath everyone? If you were to look at Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, they're fundamentally the same, right, in terms of their facial anatomy, but they still look different. So figure out what the underlying structure looks like, and then implement the specific changes in them. That's where you need good reference. For reference, you need to find pictures that are, you ideally know the focal length of. That's difficult. And one of the ways you can kind of figure that out, and you can't figure out the focal length per se, but you can at least get consistency, is in, don't just go on Google and find paparazzi photos or something like that, but find like in their movies, if they're turning around, let's say you have a character who's like in a scene, he's doing like this kind of stuff, then which is, hard to find, but then at least you have a full turnaround of his head. You have good reference there as well. But you just have to approximate the focal length, and then you need to line up cameras for it. It's stupidly hard to do likeness if you don't have good reference. A problem with likeness stuff, if you're particularly doing celebrities as well, is like the photos you're going to be finding on Google they're terrible. They might be 10 years between them, 20 years between them. Current day Robert Downey Jr. versus Iron Man 2008, quite different. There are just so many differences between people, makeup, lighting, weight loss, weight gain, all sorts of stuff. So it's very, very, very difficult. So that's why you want to find good references. Line up cameras. Likeness sculpting is just legit hard. You have to be very, very good at sculpting people in terms of pure anatomy. You have to have a very good attention to detail, and you need to be technically strong in terms of not crazy technically strong, but you need to be able to understand how to set up cameras and how to work with that as well. And just a reminder that we very much have a back to school sale at the moment. So we have, I think, 28,000 products on sale for the next almost 60 hours, so 58 hours now, ends on the end of the 8th of September. So you have tons of really, really good, cool products like the advanced character creation with Ben Erd, learning how to make a full Jeep Gladiator, just building tons of cool stuff. The creature kit, sculpting painting characters in Substance Painter, 30% off. So we have a lot of really, really, really cool products on offer at the moment. So if you're starting university now, for instance, starting school, I highly recommend picking up some tutorials based on what you want to learn. Particularly for character art, I find that a little bit rant coming up now, but I find that for, not even rant, just observation. For character art, it's almost impossible to learn proper character art from schools. There are very few character artists who are in teaching positions, and if they are, most likely they're not at your school. There are some here and there that are fantastic, but in general, most character artists are in working production. So it's just very difficult to learn how to make character art from your university or your college or community college or whatever you're attending at the moment, or particularly if you're in a high school or something, right? Then you have zero chance of learning that kind of stuff, even if you have a 3D module or something. And that's where like actually just getting a course, like a Flip Normals course for that, or like a Nicola Nadenhov or Victory 3D or anything like that, is going to help you just so much, because that's where we really collected our best tips and tricks. So that's what I found a lot of times, that you have a lot of people who go attend school, they want to become character artists, and then like a year and a half into it, they were like, all right, so when are we starting character art? And then they have a character art module, and it's just the teacher bringing out a skeleton and being like, let's look at a skeleton, and they don't really understand what's going on. So that's why we made courses like Intro to Anatomy and Introduction to Sculpting, and we have a lot of different courses on how to create good character art. So yeah, you have about 3 days more for the back to school sale. Just gonna bring my reference back here so I can see the chat as well. So it's kind of interesting, right? Like I started off, you can go back in the whole stream now to see where I started off, but I started off not really knowing where to go with this. I had no idea where I wanted to take him, and then I just basically recreating this guy here and combining with this guy here. So just playing around with that. Yeah, Laura is an amazing teacher, and Outgang is an amazing resource. Yeah, Outgang is they have a lot of really good stuff there. So definitely recommend Outgang as well. Obviously, recommend Flip Normals more, but I'm a little bit biased there as well. It's hard to find quality character education. I find there are a lot of tutorials out there, but what you want to really make sure of is that the teacher of the tutorial, that they've actually done this kind of stuff in in production, or if it's like an anatomy course that the person has like either this real world production or some kind of academic background when it comes to teaching this kind of stuff. It's a lot of stuff is made by people who are more generalists, and then they can kind of mock up a character where it looks kind of okay at the end, but there is a lot of struggling back and forth. You want to have teachers who understand this. They're like quote unquote fluent in characters, where they can really teach this kind of stuff and they properly understand it. It's a problem if they don't properly understand, because then either they're going to teach it poorly or they're going to teach you the wrong things. And then you're stuck with some crazy misunderstandings for the rest of your career, unless you somehow fix that. I'm really liking the brush I'm using now. This is, for those who are new to the stream, I'm playing around with a little bit of a Flip Normals brush pack. I want to make a few different ones. Just thinking aloud here. I haven't really formalized any of this, but I'm thinking like a pour brush, maybe a rock brush, an alternative damp standard, alternative to clay buildup, and yeah, just playing around with that. I think it's really fun just playing around with this brush here. But I think a lot of people could enjoy a more slightly refreshed version of the ZBrush brushes. Yeah, Lepra is saying, I'm using Blender Bridge to check the different camera views. Makes it much easier. Yeah, I'm doing the same in Maya as well. For focal length and such. I highly recommend, if you're doing any kind of likeness, that you take your model into another 3D software. It doesn't really matter which one it is. You're just using it for camera angles. Any software here is totally fine. Blender is great for that. That's one of the advantages actually of sculpting in Blender, that you can actually have proper camera views and such. You just have access to all the 3D tools. Well, in ZBrush you don't really have that. You do have some crappy focal length of crappy image planes here. You can import cameras. I never personally been able to figure this one out, how to make it work properly. But yeah, it might just be me as well. Tom Moore is asking, is Retopo still important to learn properly? Yep. That's it. Yep, it's important to learn properly. Otherwise, you end up as a cowboy, ZBrush cowboy, who can only do sculpting. And a lot of stuff in production, depending on what you want. If you just want to be a ZBrush cowboy and do stuff for fun, go for it. But if you're going to be interacting in any kind of models in a commercial setting, you definitely want to understand topology, UVs, all that kind of stuff. Also, because if you can't do proper topology, you probably can't really do hard surface modeling either, because really then you're just manipulating the topology. And if you can only sculpt, then it gets hard to keep it employed. Like, let's say you have a character like this and he's wearing an armor or something. If you can only sculpt the anatomy but not do the armor, they're just going to find somebody else who can do the whole thing. You don't have to be an absolute expert at hard surface modeling, but you need to be able to model props. That's really important. You need to have a good handle of topology and UVs and all that. Keep in mind, you'll be working as a production artist, not just a sculpting cowboy. There are very, very few pure sculpting jobs out there. Going to try to experiment with this. I'm not really liking his facial expression. I'm going to try to make him smile a little bit more, because I'm really liking what I'm seeing here. And what I'll do here is, remember we talked about before, you can just kill something that doesn't work. So that's exactly what we're doing now. We're just killing his mouth. And then we could do just want to flatten it a little bit. So don't be afraid of just killing something like that, right? Like if it doesn't work, it's got to go. We can take this, make a little mouth shape here, like so. And then we could use the mask or just use the move brush to just move this whole thing in. So we can just blur this a little bit. So like I said in the beginning, this is how I'm just working. Like I don't have a plan for this, to be honest. This is just my honest workflow for creating characters. Beautiful. Can go in here, and then we could do double-sided, so we can see what's going on the inside, and then we can just move this up a little bit. I'm not going to do a proper mouth here at all. I'm just going to make sure we have some volumes here. Inflate brush, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant brush. Looks so creepy. And then we can do a Dynamesh once everything is here, and then I just have to be sure that this is integrated as well, because currently this should have actually been moved a bit further down like so as well. The problem right now is that I'm looking at references of another sculpt, and that's an issue because this is like a derivative work, meaning this is not real world reference. This is not what anyone looks like. This is somebody's artistic work, and not just in a copyright sense, but in an actual practical sense that I don't know exactly what this looks like. So this is where I would try to find photos of like an old woman smiling or something like that, just so we can go with that. So I'm actually just going to start looking for that. Because you just need proper reference for this kind of stuff. Oh wow, there's a lot of weird stuff here. I'm just in a separate browser now, so I'll be showing you guys this in a second now. So I can just copy this kind of stuff into PureRef. It's really, really, really important to get proper reference for this kind of stuff. If you don't have this, then you're just working from imagination. And working from imagination can produce really interesting results in like a first pass, but it's also going to be terrible in terms of like proper realism. Just trying to find the perfect ref. Here is a woman who looks to be in her 90s, maybe over 100. Really, really good reference. So there's a bunch of good stuff you can get from this kind of stuff. This is how I often do it, where I'm starting off in one direction, not really knowing exactly where to go, and then once I've found the direction, then I need to we need to improve it. And here, this is where we are in AI land. Reasonably certain this is an AI. This is definitely an AI image, this is so annoying, because now you might be using this for actual reference, and it's not a real image. Here's another one as well, another AI images. These are all over the place on Pinterest. So it looks fairly decent, but it's not anatomical. You want to be sure that you're not just looking at something that looks pretty good. Like, it's not about it looking good, it's about it being informative. So cool. All right, I think I found a few nice pieces now. Reference, you can select all of them like so, hit Control and P. This is going to just equalize them out like so as well, or just like arrange them. I think you can also do image, and we can do arrange, and we can do, yeah, this is Control P, and we can normalize as well. We can normalize them by height, and then we can do Control P. So this is really cool. You can do tons of cool stuff in PureRef. Jesus is asking, what software are you using for streaming? OBS. I'm using OBS for streaming and for recording. This is really nice. This is a nice photo. Just trying to get the volumes of this kind of stuff right. You gotta get that teeth scan in there. Yeah, I should get that teeth scan in there. I will get the teeth scan in there. So let's get the teeth scan in there. So what he refers to is, I was at a dentist about a year ago or so, and I had my teeth scanned. And I was like, can I have the teeth scan, please? And they were like, yes. And that's the story of how I got my teeth scanned. Let's see. Hey, here we go. This is from December last year. My infamous teeth. So cool, here we go. It's really useful to have just some teeth. Obviously, this is something you should like retopologize and make proper, right? But for now, this is fine. Can just move this down a little bit like so, and move this up a little bit like so as well. And this, she has an underbite here. Well, I don't know what this is, a man or a woman or what it is yet. You can see how creepy this looks, right? From the moment you put in teeth, then just looks, it looks more realistic, which means it also in this case looks creepier. Can just move them a bit further back as well. And then we can start to integrate this a little bit more. This is where we, of course, will have to actually sculpt the lips as well here a little bit. It's very useful to have the inside of the lips like so as well. The new anatomy course you guys did is awesome. Thank you very much. That was a very, very, very hard course to make. So I appreciate that. This is a little misaligned right now, so I'm just gonna rotate this a little bit. Just trying to get the lips to look all right here now. It's a fun way of doing it where you're just starting off doodling around. You have a few pieces of reference, but you don't really know where you're taking it. And then you're just finding more reference to support it. It's an issue if you have too many pieces of reference in the beginning, because then you're going to have paralysis. You just generally won't know which direction to go, and you're going to try to move it towards one, then another, and then another. But if you just have a few pieces, then it's a lot easier to figure out what direction to go in. Let's have a look at how long we've been going for now. Wow, streaming for about an hour and a half now. Yes, so just a reminder that we very much do have a back to school sale now, which is still on for about probably 57 hours at this point. Trying to just shape the lips here. This is where you can really start to sink time into a sculpt, where you're taking it up to like this level here in like an hour or so, and then going from here to like a proper level, it takes days. This is where, if you're watching like a sketch, right, versus a final production model, there's just a substantial difference between how much time it takes to produce those. Because now you have to properly start to refine everything. So what I want to do now is I want to redirect this to go a little bit further back as well. So this is where it gets fiddly. You make a lot of progress in the beginning, and then the next 10 hours is just small iterations. Which you can feel, but you can't necessarily see a lot. But it's so important because it's always what you're seeing whenever I'm doing a tutorial or like a sculpting tutorial. There isn't an event where the sculpt becomes nice. It's just a series of smaller steps that incrementally improve it. You're doing like 15,000 brush strokes, and each one of them just improves the sculpt just a little bit. An exercise you can do as well, which is pretty cool, is you could really think about the brush strokes. I know that sounds like a stupid one, but actually just sitting back and just before you do any kind of brush stroke, same if you're drawing as well, just think about it. Do you want this shape here to be better? Okay, you're just thinking about it. You're just moving this in, moving this up, and this means that you're not going to go so much on autopilot. It's very easy to go on autopilot where you're just going crazy and brush strokes everywhere and the dust flies up around you. Well, it doesn't actually improve the sculpt. It looks like I'm just going crazy when I'm sculpting here because I'm sculpting at a quite fast speed, but I'm very much thinking about what I'm doing. Like I'm sculpting kind of in my mind before I'm sculpting in real life. So I'm never just mindlessly sculpting. I might do that a little bit in the beginning if I'm just experimenting, but once I have some kind of direction, then even then I'm still sculpting with intent in the sense that I'm deliberately experimenting, right? Here you can see something as well. Now we're changing the facial expression from it being more straight down. And now you can see this here doesn't work anymore because now we have to start to merge these shapes together, because when something is stretching like here, we're suddenly stretching this, then it needs to compress in another area. This is one of the sculpting fundamentals that's really difficult to really understand, that when something moves in one way, it needs to compress in another area, because skin only has a certain amount of mass. So if it stretches, that skin has to go somewhere. It's also a good idea to once in a while Shift R just to do a quick render, because then you can start to see it. It's still not a good render, right? Because it's ZBrush, and I guess you have Redshift integrated now if you're paying for that. But I'm not. I'm still in 2022, and but it's still good enough to give you some indication of what it's gonna look like. And here I just want to carve some stuff into it. If I'm having a bit of an issue figuring exactly where to go, then it's carving time. This is where I'm not trying to make it look pretty or anything like that. I just want to like redirect some things. I'm problem solving now basically. Just trying to figure out exactly where we can take some of these shapes here. I find this to be very useful if I'm a little bit stuck. Just going in and just carving in some of these shapes is insanely helpful. Also, when you're pushing things like this, then the eyes would also have to be pushed as well. It's very useful just to push and pull these kind of things in, but also just carving things in like this. Just really just blocking in what you want, and then you can refine this later on. It's like an observational pass essentially. Please share your opinion on the anatomical courses by Raf Grassetti. I have not watched that course, so no opinion on that. Raf is solid in terms of sculpting. I don't know what he's like as a teacher, to be perfectly honest, because I've never taken his courses, but his art, absolutely phenomenal. Here's a cool tip as well. I find it to be useful when you're sculpting a nose to add a point here, and then you're adding lines to it. 4 lines. 1 line here, 1 line here, 1 line here, and then 1 line here. This is going to give you the four main elements of the nose. This is just to give it more structure. Then we can structure each piece a little bit, and then we could, of course, you have to blend this together, right? Like this is not actually going to look like this. And we need some more resolution. 1.8 mil, yeah, that'll do. Yeah, somebody's talking about here like the rough Rossetti course. It might not be great for beginners. Again, I have never taken that, so I wouldn't have any idea. But I make a lot of courses in my day, as recently as a few weeks ago, and working on a course right now, Introduction to Mari as well, a little teaser. But one thing I've really found is you need to properly define your target audience. If you're making a course for everyone, then everyone is also mad at you. But if you're making so that means that if you're making a course where you're trying to teach beginners and advanced people at the same time, the beginners are going to be like, look, this part here is just too complicated. I can't follow this. And the advanced people are like, why are you explaining the interface? I already know this stuff. So it's very important to figure out who you're talking to. That's what I'm doing with Intro to Sculpting and Intro to Anatomy, where I'm assuming you know the ZBrush interface. If you don't, Intro to ZBrush is there. But I'm assuming you know the ZBrush interface and the tools, but you don't really know anatomy and you don't really know sculpting per se. So that's the starting point for that. So they're very specifically designed to be easy to understand or easy to follow for people who are basically brand new to either anatomy or sculpting. We have a lot of other courses as well relating to sculpting as well. All 30% off during the back to school sale. It's important to work on different parts of the character at different times. It's very tempting to just work up the eyes and then finalize the eyes and then never come back to them. But the problem is your eyes are, like, not this guy's eyes, but our human perception is really bad. Like we get used to stuff right away. The way I kind of like to think about this is, imagine if you're in a room where there's a bit of a funny smell. In the beginning, you're going to be thinking that this is weird. But then after not too long, your brain just gets used to it, and you literally don't smell the weird smell anymore. If this is like some rotten vegetables or something like that, unless of course it's such an incredibly strong smell. But as long as it's just like something which is just a little bit weird, your brain just neutralizes that fairly quickly. It's the same thing with this as well. If you think the eyes or the mouth or anything like that is working, and then you just leave it and you come back to it later on, and you're going to see all the issues. So that's why it's important to take breaks. But if you aren't taking breaks and actually going for a walk or something, at least touch different areas of the body and come back to it later on. It becomes very, very, very important. When would you render in passes in ZBrush and finish your final piece in Photoshop? I personally don't really like that approach. This was something that was kind of useful many years ago, but I find ZBrush to be pretty crap at rendering, to be honest. I might do that if I just need to get something quickly out, like if I need to show something for social media or something. But render engines have got so good today, and they're literally free, right, with something like Cycles and Blender. It's so simple to just throw your model, just export an OBJ, like decimate it, export it out, import it into Blender, and just do a nice proper render there. It's going to look so much better, and you have so much more control than the multipass workflow from ZBrush. I'm sure there is a use case for it, and some people prefer it, but we're working on like a lighting scene. Morten is working on that at the moment, like a lighting kit for Blender as well, like for Blender and Arnold, just to make it a lot easier. We already have the lighting scenes for like the existing ones, but we're going to make a brand new kit now, which is going to be even better for that. So I wouldn't even use those ones. Like even without the kit, I'm still just throwing it into Blender, putting up a few area lights and rendering out. Looks much nicer than it could ever look from ZBrush. Even with like full multipass workflow from ZBrush, is never going to look as nice or as realistic rather as from Cycles, Arnold, or anything like that. Simply because it's not PBR. Like it's not even remotely physically based in ZBrush. So the materials are not, it's using matte caps, right? Or like at least some of these are matte caps. So just do a proper render, at least if you have time for it. If you have no time, then I just do this, just do a quick render and like, ta-da, done. You can like go through here and just change the shadow settings or something, change the angle. So you get a bit softer shadows. This can look a bit better. Then you just have to change the rays as well, something a bit higher. And you can see that this is going to look a bit nicer now, but nowhere near what you'll be able to get from something like Cycles or Arnold or Redshift or anything like that. Basically any real render engine, which is from this century. Just working a little bit more on the ears. I'm going to try to make this a bit more angular now, because now the character I'm doing now is just got a little bit too soft. So I'm going to try to just make it a bit more angular where I can. When do you turn the symmetry off? Depends what you're doing. If I'm just doodling around and having fun, I honestly turn it off quite early on, particularly if I'm just having fun with a silly little sculpt or something. If I'm doing anything production art or anything like that, then I'm turning it off basically never. Then I'm trying to do as much asymmetry as I can in texturing, to be honest. Like if there's a scar or something, trying to do it in texturing, so much easier to deal with that. Asymmetry when it comes to modeling just gets annoying. So if you can avoid it, avoid it. But if you do need to, then do it after retopo. Then you can always then at least you have symmetrical topology. You really want to be sure that your topology is symmetrical, unless for whatever reason you need to have asymmetrical topology. Like somebody were to have an eye here or something, like on one of the sides, and that's just inherently asymmetrical. But if you're just nudging something a bit up and down, definitely try to keep that asymmetrical or symmetrical for as long as possible. Then you can add like asymmetry as a blend shape or something, or morph target, whatever software you are working in. What you need as well is you need some eyeballs, because currently this guy does not have eyeballs. So I'm just going to take some from the anatomy tool here. I have some here, they're already made, throw them in here and scale these guys up. Yeah, so this anatomy tool here is available for purchase on Flip Normals. Let me just find it actually. It's a really useful one. I use this all the time. So let's see if we have, it should be under Flip Normals exclusives, and then just look at some other stuff in the meantime. So this is an intro to anatomy as well. It just came out. It has 4.9 ratings. Yay. So 4.9 stars, 11 ratings. So that's cool. It's always fun to see when our products do well. I saw the intro to sculpting as well. It has like 60 ratings, almost 59 ratings, 4.8. So that's really cool. So bunch of really cool stuff here. So we have the I think there might be a lot of traffic on the site now, so that's probably why it's a little bit slow. But under latest, this is where we're going to have the Flip Normals anatomy bust. We can just come back to this in a second. Oh, and my computer is doing something. So it doesn't crash. It didn't crash. So we also have Flipnote's face VDMs as well, which are really cool. This is a series of, we can actually talk about some of the more recent products here. We have the VDMs. This is our VDMs for Blender actually. Flipnote or Blender just came out with VDMs for sculpting, so you can just use that. It's really cool. This one here is the anatomy bust. It's what, like $17. This is including VAT, so it will be a bit cheaper in the US. But yeah, just a really nice model that you can use in Blender, ZBrush, use for proper anatomy reference. This one here is a really cool one. This is hey, 5 stars. Cool. This is a course where it's not so much about the sculpting fundamentals, it's about how do you sculpt this guy. We do talk a lot about the different stages and such to him, but it's really just about make this guy A to Z. Every single step is shown. So it talks about the pores, it talks about the specific shape of the eyes and the ears and all this kind of stuff. You start from a sphere and just take him all the way up there. So yeah, just bringing him up, you can see he definitely has some crappy stages in the middle, and just how do you get out of the crappy stage? How do you make something that looks really good as a final character? So yeah, we have tons of really cool training for ZBrush, really cool sculpting training. Right, I was gonna perfect. I was gonna give this guy some eyes. Eyes are so important. Example, check it out. Looks like this. We can just put this down like so, and then once we Shift S to this, by the way, and then you do this. It looks so different, right? And you can do this. Looks so different. Looks so intense. So there's plenty of cool stuff you can do with eyes just by rotating them. Also, example, you do this, then you take one eye and you just move them. Whoops, just move them a bit to the side, like just rotate them a little bit, and making them a little bit like cross-eyed, and it just changes the look drastically. So there's so much cool stuff you can do with eyes. I tend to do this, just making look a bit up like so. What you can do, you can just move them up a little bit, and then you can rotate it a little bit as well. But then you have to conform the eyelids to this as well. It was actually in a fairly good spot with this. And here we used the dragon eyes from the Flipnote's face VDMs. Oh, sorry, the creature kit. And you know, starting off with dragon eyes and ending up with elephant eyes, I think I used. And starting off with elephant eyes and ending up with this, not bad. Yes, we spent a significant amount of time to make really cool character kits and resources for character artists. Really stuff that I don't actually think you can find elsewhere of like in terms of what we're teaching, or in terms of like the kind of products that we have. At least that's a goal we're having. And working on Intro to Mari at the moment, which I'm very excited about. And I need maybe some more resolution here. No, I can just dynamesh it. And you need to get the eyes right. Like if you don't get the eyes right, it's very difficult to make anything else right as well. Huen is asking, you put those eyes in pretty late. Do you normally put them in earlier, or was this stage? Yeah, kind of depends, right? If I'm modeling a human, then usually I put them in quite early because it's fairly standardized. But for this, I honestly didn't really know what I was making, so I put them in quite late now. But there's no risk in putting them in early. It just depends, honestly. The character art is not an exact science. Sculpting is not an exact science. Then we can go ahead and simplifying things down a little bit just by using the ZBrush here. This is the first time you're really using the ZBrush now. And the reason for this is a fantastic tool for simplifying things down. It's a blur brush, right? So if you want to blur some things, that's great because it's very easy for things to get noisy. So we have a lot of noise in a model. The noise isn't really from the texture of the brush. It's just because we've been sculpting for, I don't know, 1 hour and 50 now, and it's just noise as a byproduct of that. So at some point it's really important to just go in and just reckon with that. Just go in and realize that, yep, we made a lot of small little plane changes. Let's just simplify it down, just so you can see what you actually have. Because if you aren't really seeing what you're actually, if you don't actually know exactly what you're having, then it's difficult to know where to go from here. So just simplifying this down. This is like similar if you were to model with real clay and you just were to use some water to smooth some things down. Oh, hello, Elpida. Everyone, say hello to my girlfriend. She's in the chat. If you're hearing some crunching noises in the background, those are my pet rats eating some nice little treats. You see how big of a difference it makes when you put in eyes and and teeth. Cool little tip, you can alt-click on the subtool just to go between them like this. So you don't actually need any of this. You can work entirely in like expert mode, kind of like this, if you want to. What is your favorite mythical creature or creature to sculpt? The Fawn from Pan's Labyrinth. Still haven't been able to get that one right. One day I'll get it right. Just gonna make the nose here was supposed to be more outstretched like this, and then just through the process of sculpting it just kind of disappeared. So I think it's just really important to have a look at the design a second time. Same with the nostril as well. It's tiny. We're just going to move this out like so as well. Looking at traditional sculptors, those guys, they know they're sculpting. Are human eyes directed in slightly different directions? I find it to be useful to make them go out a little bit like so. So they're not just straight ahead. There's a little bit of an angle to them. So we probably just need to rotate these guys a little bit like so. There's so much subtlety within human eyes. Just going over here and smoothing things. I made a cool brush actually for, not really for this, it's kind of exactly opposite, but if we were to load this up, this is it's a trim brush for this. So it's a trim scrape brush. So it just does kind of this. I'm actually going to be using this now for this. It's just a really cool brush for making this a little bit more stylized, making it a bit more planar. This might end up in the aforementioned brush pack. It may or may not happen. Just to make it a bit more planar. I'm also having a massive fan on me at the moment because it's getting very warm in my apartment. Hence why there's no camera on today, because today is a warm London day. There was no summer here the whole summer, apart from like a week or so in June. And now in September it's summertime and our apartment is facing directly into the sun. That's why we're doing this stream early on today, because in about an hour or so it's gonna be too warm to be in my apartment. The other day I had to go outside because it was just too warm. So just playing around a little bit with him now. Like I don't really know where I'm taking this guy. I might be going in a more stylized direction, or I might be going in a more realistic direction. I find myself going in a bit more like planar way recently. So not so much necessarily soft shapes, just more planes. And that's why I really like this. Like I called him just like the trim scrape brush, which may or may not be the file name, and the brush may or may not exist in the future. I'm not sure if I like this brush or not. It's pretty cool, but just takes a bit of getting used to. It's basically just a trim brush with exactly the same alpha as I've been using for the clay builder brush so far. A huge mole is needed. This is true. A huge mole is needed. He will get a huge mole at some point. Might just exaggerate his underbite a little bit. So sculpting characters is really more of an iterative process. It's not like we briefly talked about before, it's not an event where it goes from, like it just kind of unblurs itself. You see this often in like time lapses or something where it just looks like it's perfect from the beginning. It's very rarely perfect from the beginning. Like it usually goes through a really ugly stage and then you just gotta just hold on, because just strap in, put on your seatbelt, and get ready for a ride, because that stage can be quite rough. Yeah, somebody here is talking about anatomy for sculptors. I find anatomy for sculptors to be really useful for simplifying down anatomy. I don't find it to be particularly useful for exact anatomy. For that, I prefer like old school books written by people dead for 100 years, because those guys were on top of things. Like old like medical books, or for illustrators way back when. Anatomy for sculptors and stuff is generally useful for a lot of things, for sure. But sometimes you just need highly specific information. I think I have a theory. This may or may not be true, but I have a theory that when it comes to anatomy, there's a lot of things that's known about the human body, known in quotation marks about the human body in terms of in the art community. That's been some guy told his student that in the 1870s, and then this guy told his students in the 1920s, and he told his students, and it's just something that we've been telling each other. So I'm wondering how much of what we say about anatomy is actually true compared to not true. Because oftentimes when you're watching anatomy courses, including mine, right, we're saying things that we picked up from our teachers. We can't verify absolutely everything we're saying in terms of going into anatomy books. If you were to do that, it would take 3 years to produce anything. So a lot of it is like, it's practical knowledge. Like, it might be useful knowledge, but it might not be 100% true. I'm just wondering how much of that is, how much of what we know collectively as artists is not true. Here I'm trying to sculpt with the flow of the model. So just trying to do this. Just to get some like gesture into the flow itself. This is not realistic, but who cares? It's my model. Do what I want with it. So this is where you can just have fun with the flow of it, just playing around with this kind of stuff. This is going to make it, a bit more gestural, a bit more artistic maybe, but up to you. I have no reason to build a portfolio anymore, so I just kind of do what I feel like. Surely there are a few surgeons who also know sculpting who would have corrected the facts along the way. Kind of doubt that. Like, I mean, how many surgeons would actually be good sculptors to the level they can like teach sculpting and teach anatomy? Like, I just don't know. It's really difficult to be really good at medicine, also really good at art. It's just not really something I see happening. I've not seen a single doctor or surgeon or anything in the medical community or in the artistic community. It might exist, I just genuinely haven't seen it. How do you apply for jobs without a portfolio? I don't apply for jobs. Phenomenals is a full-time job. So I don't, basically what I'm saying is I'm not applying for jobs. If you're asking how do you apply for jobs without a portfolio, you can't. You need a portfolio to apply for jobs. But yeah, Flipnomos has been a full-time job since for over 5 years now, since June of 2018, and we started Flipnomos almost 10 years ago now, in about a month and like a week. I think I'm bang on a month and a week. Then I think 9th of October 2013 was when we registered the domain, which is kind of the official day for that. I'm also dog sitting a dog these days, so we got her yesterday, and she's been remarkably quiet. I was afraid that she would be going crazy and sitting in my lap or barking at the mailman or something, but she has not. So she has unfortunately or fortunately not made a cameo in today's stream. So I'm just trying to work, just playing around with the face now a little bit, just with trying to just make it a bit more gestural. This is definitely making it more stylized, right? Where people don't look like this. People don't have lines like this. People have wrinkles and such, but what I'm doing now isn't really that. It's more just trying to make it flow a little bit better. Just experimenting with that. How would you rate a dog out of 10? That would be a... I woke up with somebody licking my ear today. 10. Yeah, that's definitely a 10 out of 10. Your rat barks. No, my rat doesn't bark. Dog Henning. We also have rats as well. Rats don't bark, they just squeal. Pick them up and they're just beeping. Groom each other and they're just beeping. Great little guys. They're called Momo and Mika, and they are very good little boys. I like to make this a bit more stylized in a sense. Like once you've been doing realism for a certain amount of time, you kind of just want to experiment with things, just go a little crazy, just have fun with this. But I find it to be more useful, honestly, to not really stylize it too early, because then I'm dealing with a lot of different things. Then I'm dealing with what design am I going for? I'm dealing with what is the anatomy of the creature, as well as like actual art direction as well. It becomes just too much for my brain, which in this weather has very limited capacity. My brain in this weather is basically like a Pentium 2 from like 1998 or whenever it was. Not a good time for a Northern European boy to be in a heat wave. Yes, just going over here and just trying to make something interesting. This is where I would normally disable symmetry, but I'm still not convinced that this is the look I want to go for. So I'm just going to play around with this a little bit more. I will use this one here, this brush here. I find this to be a bit better for this kind of work. I should rename this to Clay Scrape. I think that would be better because it's kind of scraping. Workflow-wise for VFX, you still generate displacement maps from the high poly and also bake normals. So how you could do it, there are many ways of doing this. There isn't necessarily a correct way of doing it. So for really the highest of the resolutions, you might want to just do that in something like Paint or Amari, and then generate a normal map from that. So that would be entirely separate from the sculpting. In terms of displacement map, you would just generate that directly under C plugin and multi-map export, and either a displacement or a vector displacement for this. In my day in VFX, we used just displacement, but now they're using a lot of vector. Well, we used vector displacement for Pacific Rim as well. So a lot of companies have now started using vector displacement maps. These vector disps are entirely data maps, meaning that you really can't edit them in something like Photoshop afterwards. You can't really, it's hard to bring them into something like Painter to use them for cavities or something like that. Well, displacement maps can be used for that. Like you can use that more as a utility map where, well, both are utility maps, but you can actually grade it up and such like that. Basically, a vector disp is purely for computer eyes. If you were to look at this with human eyes, it wouldn't really make too much sense. But a regular disp can be used for that. But yeah, the workflow is still generate you're not really baking it per se. You're not really like taking it into Painter and baking it there, into Marmoset and baking or anything like that, or into Node or something. You're just straight up exporting from the multi-map exporter. And then you would be setting it up in Arnold, or wherever you prefer to use it. Rotate the light for us. No, I like the lighting. Gonna keep the lighting this way. This is where you're now seeing more incremental changes, where in the beginning, the first hour of the stream, there were big changes every 10 minutes. But the more you work on a scope, the less changes there are. Imagine if you were to make a full VFX character or something you spend 6 months on. Between day 150 and 160, there's not going to be that many differences, right, in the actual model. So it's more and like it's more and more incremental the further you go in it. Just trying to get some more shapes in here. I really like to use the dam standard for this, just carving in some of these shapes. So you can just see when it comes to creating models like this, it just takes time. There's no shortcut. You can't rush this kind of stuff. It just takes a lot of time to do quality art. Have you got any tips for getting back momentum due to burnout? If you're actually burning out, you just need time off. Like you just need to recover from that, and then you just slowly need to get started with it again. Like if you need to be careful about not doing the same thing that led to a burnout in the first place. Take care of your body. Go to the gym. That lift 200 kilos. Be careful about going back to the same patterns as you had before. And now let's break down the symmetry. Shift X, I have a custom hotkey for that. This is where I'm just gonna play around with the symmetry for a bit. Yeah, so I'm probably not going to continue for too much longer because I'm going to be boiled alive in this apartment in around 20 minutes. The sun is already creeping in and I can feel the heat coming on me now. So if you guys have any questions, more questions, I'm very happy to answer that. I'm just kind of doodling around now, just playing around with different shapes. So very happy to just answer questions while I'm doing this. I watched so many of your tutorials and you guys are a blessing for me in Maya and ZBrush. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Tons more tutorials coming. We are hopefully getting out a Maya skin shading tutorial, maybe today, for YouTube as well. So that's going to be pretty exciting. Skin shading in Arnold. We recorded this some time ago now, but we've been too busy. Dirtiest Deeds is saying, nice work anyway, Henning. I'll be very happy to reach that stage from a bowl in a couple of hours. Technically, didn't start from a bowl. Technically, I started from this very, very, very low poly little guy. It speeds it up just a little bit, just having some core volumes in there. Symmetry is awesome because it speeds up your work, but I really like to sculpt without symmetry. I find it to be so much more fun to sculpt without symmetry. But I tend to do that either from the complete beginning where I'm just doodling around, or with once I've found the design. Because if you keep experimenting with your model, then you have to then you really have to change both sides at the same time, which is just quite annoying. Just trying to move one side up a little bit. I'm not really concerned with how the face deforms or anything like that. I'm mostly just playing around with different shapes now, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. Kiwi is saying, hey Henning, what do you recommend when it comes to showing off the current level I'm at to a professional for feedback without coming off as self-centered, for lack of a better word? Whenever I feedback people, like I have a mentorship right next to what I'm doing here, and the way I gauge their level is to just look at their ArtStation. Have an up-to-date ArtStation with some nice screen grabs of your work. If it's character art, I honestly wouldn't bother with pure for feedback. I wouldn't bother with fancy lights or anything like that. Just take a screenshot of what you're doing, like do like a front view, side view, and this kind of stuff is enough for me to gauge your level, meaning it's good enough for me to figure out how to improve your art from there. If you're doing for portfolio, then you definitely have to be sure that you light your stuff and present it well, but purely for like presentation, that's kind of what you do in VFX, right? I'm sure in games as well, we have dailies where it's not about it necessarily looking the best, it's more about being able to see what's going on there. So for when I was in VFX, we would just do tons of dailies just from ZBrush screen grabs because there's plenty of that. In terms of like not seeming self-centered, well, I mean, you're asking for feedback, right? Then just be honest about it. You don't like, just don't defend yourself. If somebody comes with feedback and you disagree with it, then like if you know the feedback is wrong, for instance, that could happen sometimes, then you just go like, thank you for the feedback. Or if you don't understand it, you're like, okay, that's interesting, can you elaborate on that? But basically like just remove the ego entirely from the equation. It's not about you, it's about your work. Your work is not the same as you. If you do good work, does not mean you're a good person, and if you do bad work, does not mean you're a bad person. Your work is your work, and it's not you. So I think it's really important to decouple those things. So if you get some really nasty or some really harsh feedback, that just means also you now just know where to, I mean, it's hard, right? It sucks to get really harsh feedback, but it means that you now know where to go. It just means that something that you didn't know has now been shown to you, and you have a better path there. I had a beginner ZBrush question. Can you control S like in other programs without the annoying pop-up? No. The reason is because you have to kind of, like I set this to save as, like I set it to tool save as. I mean, you can do it with projects, I think. There is like a quick save. I'm sure you can map this to control S or something. But in terms of if you want to save as a tool, there's no way to do that. It's really annoying. So there might be some add-ons or something, or like some C scripts or something for that. But I haven't found a way of doing that. One of the many examples of ZBrush going its own way and being a weird 3D software. I mean, even saving, right? A little rant coming up. Saving, you're starting off ZBrush the first time. Cool. Document save as. That's of course how you save as. Crap, it isn't. Maybe it's tool? Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it's under file save. It's not just cosmetic, right? These are entirely different ways of saving. That saves completely different data. Saving in ZBrush, not the greatest strength, I would say. Can you name some Renaissance artists with good anatomy? My boy Bernini. Bernini is fantastic. Bernini. And then of course you have all the Ninja Turtles as well. So those are obviously great. Michelangelo and other guys. there are a bunch of really good ones from there. But Bernini, he's fantastic. Michelangelo as well, of course, is brilliant. You might not necessarily want to look at their anatomy, specific anatomy. Modern anatomy is much better than what they were doing because we actually have knowledge of what we're doing. You know, modern knowledge. But what they were insanely good at is, like, their anatomy was good as well. Don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing Bernini. It's more that what they were absolutely essential at, absolutely insane at, was a gesture and appeal and making something feel just incredibly lifelike and emotional. So that's where I would really study the old masters from. And while modern anatomy books are going to be better than what they had back then. You can see there's a big difference in a lot of sculptures as well. Once you get to like the 1800s as well, we just knew more about anatomy, which just means it's easier to sculpt things, right? But like if you ever go to Rome, if you have the opportunity to go to Rome, that's like the most beautiful place when it comes to sculptures. Like all the Renaissance sculptures, it just absolutely phenomenal. Or like if you have an opportunity to go to London, go to the V&A Museum, the Victor and Albert Museum, free to attend. Completely insane stuff there as well. They have a replica of the David statue there as well. I was there not too long ago, and just crazy stuff. Do you have any tips on smoothing the sculpts without destroying all the details with a smooth brush? Yep, I do. So first off, I tend to not smooth too much, right? So like what I'm doing now, for instance, is I'm working with just a clay brush, and I'm just working it up. So you can see how it gets nice and smooth. But if I do smooth, which I do sometimes do, then I mentally do this. Let's say it's an area like this and I want to smooth it. I don't actually mask it off, but then I do this, and then I basically work in circles within this, just so I'm very methodical about this. The bad part would be to just do this, right? Just like tick, 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 tick. Then you're just smoothing indiscriminately. So let me show you what I mean here. This would be just like this. Here you can see I'm not touching the border. The bad stuff is this. Tick, 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 tick. You kill everything. But now I'm just mentally doing what I was just explaining before, where I'm just going over in circles. It takes a bit longer, but it means you see you get really clean and nice shapes from this without destroying the surrounding ones. So before and after, right? So you can see that the line is still there. So you can go through this and just soften the whole thing. So it's about being deliberate. That's why I keep telling beginners to be careful with the smooth brush. Like if you want to smooth, right, go ahead. It's not a bad tool at all. It's more that you just want to be careful because it's just a blur tool. It's a destruction tool, right? It removes information from it. So, and you can't really get that back. Like if you smooth something, you can't like unblur it. The information is now permanently blurred. You have to resculpt it again. So smooth, not evil, but it's a powerful tool, and treat it like such. What I tend to do as well, I find this to be quite useful when it comes to the eyes, is select one and then rotate it around. Just rotate it towards one angle. And just a tiny bit. Just adds a little bit of character, or more character. And this is also why I want to do renders occasionally, because here you can see that the eyes will turn black now, because this is where, just how it works, right? We don't have a black part of the eyes, like the pupil doesn't exist per se. Like it's more like it's just darkness because of shadows, right? So that's why this works quite well, but why you have to do test renders throughout. And it would not be a Henning sculpt without a scar. But you can see how playful the line is. I'm not just going duck. Like I'm actually working the line up several times. My teacher compared the smooth brush to an eraser, which I think is accurate enough. I don't think that is actually 100% accurate. I think it's a blur brush. You know, in Photoshop you have the actual blur brush, the eraser. That actually removes things. Like you can, for instance, do a store morph target, then you can do like a thing like this, and then you can use an eraser. This is actually erasing. This is not what this is straight up erasing things, right? This is not what the smooth brush is doing. The smooth brush is just blurring things. So blurred. But if it helps to think about it as an eraser, that's fine. But I personally don't find it to be useful to think about it like such. Oh, this is awesome from Kuro. Hi Henning, you guys helped me so much on my 3D journey. You reviewed my portfolio a couple of years back. I was hired as a 3D sculptor. I can't read this. I was hired. There's a YouTube thing. Hired as a 3D sculptor this year. So I just wanted to say thank you. Oh, thank you so much. That's awesome. There's a bug in ZBrush that sometimes pen pressure disappears. How you fix that? Alt tab. Just do one quick Alt tab. There are so many idiosyncrasies with ZBrush. It's like having a car from the 1960s that somehow is still running, but the owner is like, all right, yeah, in order to make it run, you have to just kick the gearbox really, really, really hard. In order to get the blinkers to work, you just have to smack it 3 times, right? There are just so many things like this in ZBrush that you just have to know how it works. I find it to be very useful to break up the symmetry, particularly along the center lines. You just get such a more natural result this way. The dog is lying and snoring next to me now, and it's adorable. Means she's not going to bark at the mailman at least. Alright, I'm going to do a few more questions and then I'm going to end the stream for now. I might do another sculpting session tomorrow as well, just to in honor of the sale, also because it's good fun to do. But no promises there. If I do, just check that out on the Flipping Wall social media, or I'm also going to put that out on my own Twitter as well, just Henning Sanden at Twitter. So for now, I'm just going to play around with a little bit of the making this a little bit more planar, and then we're going to retire for today. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this guy here for, let's see how we are going for time now. We guessing just 2 hours. Oh, 2.5 hours, wow. And maybe ZBrush is crashing now, maybe it doesn't, who knows. Can I rewatch this tutorial after? Yeah, this is going to be just on YouTube, so we're not taking these down. We also have plenty of streams from the summer sale as well, where we covered a lot of cool anatomy. Like those were more, I had a few lectures there, like actual proper lectures, so basically more like tutorials on anatomy. So yeah, feel free to check those out as well. So we've done a fair bit of streaming in the last few months now. That was in like 2 months ago now. Just trying to make this a little bit more planar. And then you need to do the artistic thing, which is this, just on the edges of this, to make it appear that you'd be using some kind of fancy clay brush the entire time, and that you were just whimsical and everything was just happened to come by in a careless and free way, because I never make any mistakes. That is what this tells people. So I've had this before where they were asking like, how do you work with the clay brushes? I like the edges so much. Literal just at the end of the sculpt, after spending like 5 hours on a proper sculpt, being super methodical and attentive to detail, I just go in and just bash it up. Makes it seem like I'm way cooler than I am. Not that I think you can judge my coolness based on my sculpt. How much would you charge for this kind of sculpt? Only the head part. I mean, honestly, that just depends so much, right? Like there is no answer to this. Depends on your personal rates. The rates between, like the rates people have as for freelance is between very little and a lot. Personally, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't sell this because I don't do freelance. I do mentorship, so well, that's the only thing I'm doing. I don't do any freelance work per se. All right, cool. That's where I'm going to be ending this one. Thank you so much, guys, for joining. It's been good fun. I really had fun with this character here, even though I had no idea where I was going to take him when I started off. So we're just gonna have a look at what he looks like this, and like this. And then just remember that we have my keyboard doesn't work now. Just remember that we have a back to school sale at the moment where all Flip Moments exclusives, I'm just going to send a link to this, are 30% off, and we have a significant amount of tutorials and resources from other creators as well, at a quite substantial discount as well. So yeah, just check that out. We have tons of really cool tutorials. We have face VDMs. We have really AAA cinematic tutorials. We have realistic masterclasses. 4.9, not bad. Just learning how to do the whole thing in Blender and ZBrush and Painter. So we have a lot of really cool tutorials that are 30% off. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Let's see if I come back tomorrow or not. And yeah, speak later, guys.